So, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies video. I'm, of course, Spike Knight, and in these videos, I love talking about things, movies and TV, and whatever I want, or whenever I want. And in today's video, I'm reviewing the new Paul McCartney documentary, Man on the Run. So, let's get into it, shall we? Man on the Run, as I just said, is this new documentary all about Paul McCartney and his life post being a Beatle, post the Beatles breakup in 1970. And in this documentary we learn about the personal struggles and the creative struggles that Paul McCartney went through after the Beatles breakup, and we also see the formation of Wings, the band that Paul McCartney formed after the Beatles breakup as well. And alongside seeing this story being told about Paul McCartney going through some difficult times after the Beatles breakup, we also get a lot of interviews about what was going on with Paul McCartney during this time. We get interviews from the man himself, yes, so interviews from McCartney himself throughout this documentary, and we get interviews from the people who are closest to him. For instance, two of his daughters are interviewed throughout the documentary, Mary McCartney and Stella McCartney, two people who are famous in their own ways. They're interviewed throughout this documentary, alongside people like Mick Jagger, the lead singer of the Rolling Stones, somebody I did not expect to hear. I did not expect to hear his voice in this documentary. You hear his voice. He's interviewed about McCartney's life too, and so is Sean Ono Lennon, who is of course the son of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. He is interviewed a lot throughout this documentary too, alongside many other people who help tell this narrative, who help tell this story about Paul McCartney's life post being a Beatle, and the struggles he went through personally and the struggles he went through creatively. And I was very much looking forward to this documentary once I heard it was coming out. I heard it was coming out about a month ago now, and I thought, oh, that's going to be good to watch, because if you hadn't guessed already, I am a huge Beatles fan, hence why I'm wearing the Paul McCartney t-shirt for this review today. I'm also a big fan of Paul McCartney too, but I'm an even bigger fan of the Beatles. Not a day goes by when I don't listen to a Beatles song. Genuinely, just before doing this review today, I was listening to I Want to Hold Your Hand. Oh, such a catchy song, and I love the Beatles loads, and I've not shied away from that at all on this channel. I've spoken about them at length on this channel in the past, and one of the reasons I was really looking forward to this documentary is because over the past week or two, I've been rewatching a lot of the Beatles stuff on Disney+, a lot of the Beatles documentaries. And on Disney+, you have the Beatles Anthology, the 9-part docuseries all about the Beatles' life told in their own words, which I think is amazing. And you also have the Peter Jackson directed docuseries, The Beatles Get Back, all about the Let It Be recording sessions, in which you see all this amazing footage from the Let It Be recording sessions and the build up to the famous rooftop performance. So yes, I've been rewatching those two Beatles docuseries recently, and while I was doing so, I've occasionally thought, you know what? I don't know a lot about Paul McCartney's solo career. I've heard a lot of his music post the Beatles. I'm somebody who actually thinks his solo career and his work with Wings was probably the most successful out of all the Beatles' solo career after the Beatles breakup. I know George Harrison had All Things Must Pass, which is a tremendous album, and I also like a lot of Ringo's solo stuff like Back Off Boogaloo, It Don't Come Easy, Photograph, and I think John Lennon had some absolutely amazing songs too after the Beatles breakup. But I personally think the most creatively interesting Beatle after the Beatles broke up, the most creatively interesting with their solo career and with their work with Wings, is Paul McCartney. So I was looking forward to this documentary to see how his story was covered, because I want to know more about Wings. I want to know more about Paul McCartney's solo career. I've seen him live, I love him that much, and that's actually how I got this t-shirt. I bought it at one of the stands just before. Actually, I didn't buy it. My brother bought it me. He bought it me, I think, at one of the stands just before I saw him in concert, which was a mind-blowing experience. Loved it to pieces. Yeah, he's still a rocker now. I saw him, was it Christmas 2 years ago, and God, you wouldn't believe that man is, what, in his 80s now? I think he's in his 80s. Anyway, yeah, he is still a legend. And I wanted to know more about what he went through post the Beatles breakup, which was a big deal for him. And yeah, so that's why I was looking forward to watching this documentary, and that's why I made a note of watching it on the day it came out. Yes, I watched it on Friday, the 27th of February. Not that that matters at all, but you get the point I'm making. I was looking forward to it a lot, so I watched it the day it came out. And honestly, surprise, surprise, I absolutely loved this documentary. I thought it was such an enjoyable and fascinating watch, and it also provided me with proof that Paul McCartney's career, his solo career post the Beatles, deserves more love. You know, because the stuff he went through, oh my god, I did not realise that a lot of his music post the Beatles breakup was actually criticised. Like, the album Ram was heavily criticised. And granted I haven't listened to the whole album, but I think the song, you know, Uncle Albert from that album is absolutely terrific. And I didn't know these things that he went through. I didn't know that he went through personal struggles. I didn't know that he basically, you know, went completely silent after the Beatles breakup. I didn't know that he was struggling to find himself musically after the Beatles breakup, and I also didn't really know about the formation of Wings, and I didn't know much about his relationship with Linda McCartney. I've heard that they had a very close relationship, and I think he refers to Linda McCartney as the love of his life, and you really get that feeling whilst you're watching this documentary. And I found this new appreciation for Linda McCartney, which I didn't really have before. You know, not that I thought she was bad in any way before, but I didn't think of her in a particularly admirable light, but now I do. I think she's one of the reasons that Paul McCartney made such classic songs after the Beatles, such as, you know, Live and Let Die, Let Me Roll It, Band on the Run, which is I know I've already used the word amazing like 2 or 3 times in this video today, but God, Band on the Run is such an amazing song. And he also made songs like Coming Up and Letting Go and My Love. I mean, these songs, God, just thinking about them makes, you know, just thinking about them now, it makes me want to listen to them and just soak them all up again. And I think what you really get from this documentary is you understand that she is the reason behind so much of his creative instincts, you know. And yeah, I really liked how that was explored in this documentary. I also liked hearing interviews from people who were in Wings, who were in the many different formations of Wings. That was another thing I didn't know, that there were like 3 or 4 formations of Wings. I think we see about 3 formations of Wings in this documentary, and I didn't know how many band members that band went through and why certain band members left. I didn't know a lot about Wings and the many formations it had prior to watching this documentary, and I found that all very interesting, and I think it's a very well made documentary. It's directed by, I think his name is Morgan Neville, and he also directed Piece by Piece, which was the film in Lego all about Pharrell Williams' life. And I really wanted to love that I really wanted to love it. It wasn't really a documentary, although it kind of was actually, wasn't it? But it was, yeah, it's also kind of a biopic. Anyway, I really wanted to love that film, and I didn't. But I think this is where Morgan Neville really works at his best when he's doing these sort of documentaries. If he makes more music documentaries like this, I'll tell you now, I'll be watching them, you know, because I think this is really well done. I like this style of music documentary where you don't actually see talking head interviews. I don't mind that as well. You know, the Beatles Anthology, that has a lot of talking head interviews from people who are close to the Beatles and the Beatles themselves, but I also like when you get documentaries like this where you don't actually see talking head interviews and you just hear interviews from people who are telling the story during this time, like the Oasis documentary that did that. It's what's it called, Oasis Supersonic, you know, which is all about the build up to their performance at Nebworth. That's a really great documentary, and you don't actually see talking head interviews, and I actually think it makes it a more engrossing viewing experience, you know. And you also got that with the Take That docuseries, which came out on Netflix a couple of weeks ago now, which I also loved. And I think that's really effective when it's done well, and it's done very well in this documentary. Now, I have my nitpicks here and there. For instance, in this documentary, you don't get to learn about how the name Wings came about, and I would have liked to seen that, because I read online how Paul McCartney came up with the name Wings for the band Wings. I've heard how he came up with that name. I don't know if it's true or not, and the fact that it's not covered in this documentary makes me think that maybe it isn't true. But if it is true, if that is, I'm not going to go into the story because I wouldn't do it justice, but if the story that I read is true about how Paul McCartney came up with the name Wings, I wish that was covered in this documentary, because that's a really interesting story, and it isn't, that's one of my criticisms. And also, this documentary, and I love this about this documentary, it focuses a lot on the relationship between Paul McCartney and John Lennon, Lennon and McCartney. It focuses a lot on their relationship after the Beatles. And I loved that about the documentary, as I just said, but also I would have liked them to tell us a bit more about how McCartney and Lennon started to, mend their relationship, how they started to talk again, what they started to talk about. Because I have heard McCartney talk about how he and Lennon started to, mend their relationship post the Beatles breakup, but this documentary doesn't really talk about that, and yet that relationship, that famous relationship, that famous songwriting partnership, it's such a huge part of this documentary, and it's brilliantly focused on it. Also makes the documentary moving emotionally to watch, but I just think it misses a little bit because you don't get to hear how those two began to build bridges again, because there was a fallout between them two, a famous fallout after the Beatles broke up, and I just would have liked to have seen that. I just would have liked to have heard how they build their bridges again, after the Beatles breakup. But those are kind of my only criticisms. I would have liked to have heard how the name Wings came about, because I've heard how, and I would have liked to see how it was done in this documentary, and I would like to see how they did it, and I would have also liked to have known a bit more about the relationship between Lennon and McCartney post the Beatles breakup. But I also think that the focus, as I've already said, the focus on Lennon and McCartney in this documentary is done exceptionally well. And what I didn't expect, actually, was to find this documentary quite as emotionally moving as I ended up finding it. It is an emotionally moving documentary. Like, I knew that John Lennon's death was going to be covered in this documentary because it's a huge part of Paul McCartney's story. Of course it is. But I didn't know how it was going to be covered. And I loved how it was covered. Loved it. It was so emotionally effective. And it also made for a satisfying watch with the focus on their story throughout this documentary, with the focus on Lennon McCartney's story throughout this film. Yeah, I loved this documentary. I mean, granted I'm biased, yes, because I'm a Paul McCartney fan, and, I've seen him live, so, I've got him wearing a Paul McCartney t-shirt, so of course I'm biased. But I also think this will work for people who aren't perhaps huge fans of Paul McCartney. I can't see people who are just not fans of Paul McCartney watching this, but you never know. But I do think if you are just a little bit interested in Paul McCartney and who he is and what drives him creatively and why he took different directions with his music after the Beatles, I do think you'll get a lot out of this. I do think you'll get a lot out of it, and I also think it really helps with the interviews that you hear throughout this documentary too. Like, hearing interviews from Sean "Oh No" Lennon just adds that little cherry on the ice on top of the cake. I thought this documentary was satisfying, fulfilling in ways that I didn't expect it to. It was very enjoyable to watch, and it packs a lot of information in there, but all of it was really interesting in my opinion. And it also, one last thing, it doesn't present Paul McCartney in this completely perfect light, It's not a fluff piece. You do see that he makes some bad decisions here and there. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to spoil what those bad decisions are, but there were decisions like, you could have dodged that quite easily, and he's not quite as perfect as perhaps some people think he is. And I like how this documentary didn't paint him in a perfect light, is the point I'm making. I really like that about this documentary too. Yeah, this documentary, to me, provided proof that Paul McCartney's solo career and his work with Wings deserves more love. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what I wanted from. That's kind of what I wanted from this documentary, you know. And so, all in all, I'm gonna say that Man on the Run. Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. Yeah, I have my nitpicks here and there, and there were parts of this documentary I was like, oh, would I like to know a bit more information about this and about that, but I could go into my nitpicks. But I also don't really want to, because, yeah, I got what I really wanted from this documentary at the end of the day. It also helped that you had all these interviews that really made the story come to life, and it also, even so I love his solo music, and I love his music with Wings so much already, it also made me appreciate all that music in a new light, which I hadn't already. And it made me appreciate him in a new light, because again, he doesn't paint himself in the perfect picture of some artists if they had the opportunity to do it, if they had the opportunity to do a documentary like this would do. Yeah, Paul McCartney is at the end of the day human, and that's what this documentary really shows him as, just a human trying to make his life work after the world's greatest band split up. And yeah, I think it explored that very well. I loved it. Surprise, surprise. And so, all in all, as what he said, and I was going to say once more in this video today, Man on the Run is a 9 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, that's it for today's video. If you have seen Man on the Run, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching this video today. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this video. And look forward to many more videos coming like this very, very soon on this channel. As what he said, thank you for watching this video today. And I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.